The Fantasy Skirmisher.
Hey everyone, this is Nevin and welcome back to the Fantasy Skirmisher. When I moved to Manhattan in 2017, I didn't know anybody, but it was really easy for me to meet people and make friends because of the internet. I got involved in a gaming group which splintered into dedicated gaming groups because of Meetup, as well as Facebook, and also Board Game Geek and other sites like that. It was really easy to kind of find my group. And I'm involved in several different gaming groups for what type of gaming I like because of that. And I'm very thankful. It's very easy for me to get involved. Then I started reflecting on my experience when I first got into gaming in the pre-digital age, and that means growing up in the 1970s. So my experience was basically, I met a teenager when I was like in 7th grade. I met an older teenager in high school who introduced me to war games. And we're talking, Avalon Hill, the Russian campaign, and the Battle of the Bulge. And Battle of the Bulge was designed in the mid-60s. So wargaming had been around for a while, but in the mid-70s, with Dungeons and Dragons, which kind of grew from miniature wargaming, this fantasy gaming and science fiction gaming really started taking off. And up until the time when I discovered war games, I was basically making up my own miniature wargaming by buying 172nd scale army men, creating terrain on poster board, and creating landing craft out of cardboard, like cereal boxes, things like that, and painting them up and playing with a friend of mine. But that all went out when I discovered war games. It was really amazing to just see history in a box, to relive it. But another thing I was interested in was, fantasy and science fiction. And there wasn't that much up until, Chainmail, a miniature war game rule set, developed into Dungeons and Dragons. And right after that was Tunnels and Trolls. And it just kind of blew up. Not only role-playing games, but also war games started getting into fantasy and science fiction subject matter. But back then, it was really hard to find anybody. All my friends, they were cool, and so they thought what I was doing was really nerdy and stupid, and so I didn't really have any friends that I could game with. And I remember one time I was at that teenager's house playing a war game, and all of a sudden I hear some yelling outside, the window. It was one of my old friends, from first grade calling me out, angry about, I guess, what I was doing. So anyway, I excused myself, went outside. We got into a fist fight. I went back into the guy's house and resumed my turn. And that's kind of like how it was. I really didn't meet people in junior high or even high school for that matter. So a lot of the gaming that I did was solitaire. I did meet one person and we did some one-on-one D&D, but that didn't last very long because, it was just a DM and then me. So that didn't last very long. But really, gaming for me didn't take off until the mid-2000s, and I discovered Board Game Geek, got back into gaming, really hardcore. But again, how did the community establish itself back in the pre-digital age? I mean, that was my experience growing up in the suburbs, in California, where I didn't have access to, a lot of places I can go to try to meet. But here, magazines in the 1970s really helped form a gaming community. So we're going to go through each of these and just do a real quick micro history of the early gaming magazines devoted to science fiction and fantasy gaming. Now, gaming magazines had been around for a while. So for example, the General magazine by Avalon Hill was first published in 1964. And that's when historical wargaming really started taking off. But the General and other related magazines such as Strategy and Tactics, Fire and Movement, both by SPI, were dedicated to historical wargaming. And so you could see before the digital age, they had opponents wanted. You could post, an article say, hey, I live here, Queens resident, looking for New York City area opponents for Sirius, whatever those initials are. But that is kind of what we did, is all pen and paper. And magazines were an important vehicle to not only find gaming groups, but to get information on conventions, industry news, all the things that we really take for granted nowadays. But the General, sadly, I think was last published in 1998 because Avalon Hill was taken over by Hasbro. Now, the earliest magazine was the Space Gamer, which was dedicated to sci-fi and fantasy gaming, and was published from 1975 to 1985. Howard M. Thompson, who's the owner of Metagaming, was the magazine's first editor. When Steve Jackson departed Metagaming to start his own company, he also secured the right to publish the Space Gamer from issue 27 on. The PDFs of Steve Jackson's, from 27 on, are available for sale on Steve Jackson Games' website. And so let's take a look. So I've got issue 15 here, 17, 16, 18, and these were all published by Metagaming. And this issue right here, 29, was published by Steve Jackson Games. So let's take just a quick look at these and just get an idea for what the contents are. All right, so we have issue 15 here, published in 1978. And looking at the contents, it features Designer's Introduction to Wizard. Wizard is in print now by Steve Jackson Games because it was designed by Steve Jackson. And this was a follow-up game to Melee, and both were tactical combat systems which morphed into the Fantasy Trip role-playing system. Olympica was one of the metagames, or microgames I should say, from Metagaming. Articles for Traveler, Floating Hulks, Ogre Update, Orcs and Their Weapons, and Imperium, a game review of Imperium, and different columns. Where are we going? The Darna Game Report, whatever that is, news and plugs, books, comics, and letters. So, and this really became an important magazine, especially in the 80s, because it covered a wide variety of topics related to sci-fi and fantasy gaming. So not just dedicated to one company. And it has some nice artwork throughout. Robotics for Traveler, the RPG, which is still being played today and popular. Ogre Update. Ogre was the first microgame that came out by Metagaming. And Metagames, you can see there's an ad right here, which includes for Olympica and the Fantasy Trip, that's the RPG, and Death Test is a solo module for that. Something also at some point planned to cover on this channel. And then we've got issue 17. GEV is the follow-up to Ogre. And if you're not familiar with Ogre, Ogre was the first metagame designed by Steve Jackson in 1977. And Ogre is a futuristic cybernetic tank that is as powerful as an entire army. So it pits one tank against the other opponent's entire army, which would include, tanks, hovercraft, infantry, missile platforms, things like that. And it's pretty well balanced. I've won and lost on both sides, and a lot of fun. And I also want to cover this at some point as well, because I got the big giant deluxe edition. All right, and GEV is the sequel to Ogre, and has a lot more vehicles and really superior in every way, because it also has a map with a variety of terrain as opposed to just a nuclear wasteland. Chitin 1, another look. Chitin 1 is a microgame that I covered on this channel, so if you haven't seen it yet, please take a look. And you can see adjusted orc rules, additional units for Imperium, lots of Imperium stuff, news and plugs. So if you if you're interested in going to a convention, this is where you would get that news of when and where, plus regular gaming news. Gaming clubs would advertise their clubs on here, so you could find them. So again, this was an important way for us early gamers to kind of build and create that community. Designer's Notebook, Gondor and Sauron, a review. And of course, letters to the magazine. And I always loved looking at the ads. I owned that one, and 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 that. Well, I owned all of them. All right, let's move on to issue 16. We've got just a few left here. So more features. Demons. I'm not sure if that's the game Demons, which I had a long time ago. The Warlord game, Atlantis, War of the Ring. Classics simulated. So I guess it's using Melee and Wizard to simulate, classics like Beowulf and things like that. Harmonious Fists in Melee. Alpha Omega corrections and revisions. So it looks like some errata there. Demons. I'm not sure about this. I remember there was a game called Demons. It was a micro game, but from a different company. And then we got the gaming conventions and gaming news, plugs, feedback results, Invasion America, a review. And then issue 18. So this is July, August 1978. Article on where we are going. Ads, monsters. Ice War, a designer's introduction. That was another micro game. Red Guard, a future history scenario. The Great Northern War, War of the Ring, for 2 to 5 players. So this is SPI's War of the Ring game. And I sold my game probably about 2 years ago. It was a deluxe unpunched game with a mounted board, boxed by SPI, Strategic Publications. And I really regret selling it. I'm really bummed about that. More harmony for fists in Melee. Addendum equipment and weapons for Traveler. Oh, interesting. So mounted Melee. And the more news and plugs so people could find each other. And review is Starships and Spacemen. Never heard of that. And of course, letters. And then one thing I noticed with when Steve Jackson took over, they actually put what features are inside the magazine on the cover where it wasn't done before. So interesting. So this is issue 29 and it went up to $2. And so this is 1980 here. So a little bit different formatting here. So you do with different departments, articles, painting, fantasy miniatures, game design, theory and practice, fantasy and science fiction game magazine survey. Okay. What's going to be in the next issue? And I noticed this magazine has a lot of upside down ads from Martian Metals, including the back cover from them, which is also upside down. Don't know what the gimmick is there. Just kind of weird. All right, designer's notes and errata for the fantasy trip. That's the RPG, which Steve Jackson Games finally got the rights to that magazine. To that gaming system, and republished it via Kickstarter. And I think, was it 2017 when that happened? I have a copy of that, and again, that's on my to-do list. Painting fantasy miniatures, but no pictures, of course. I noticed the paper. This is glossy paper. Looks like when Steve Jackson Games got it. It's kind of more of that, I don't know what you'd call it, but kind of more like newspaper. I mean, it's holding up well, obviously, but it's not glossy. Capsule reviews, Bushido, Death Maze. I also sold Death Maze, a box copy of that. I'm really bummed I did it. Divine Right, a capsule review. This was published by TSR, and what is really cool about this is that Burning Banners war game that recently came out that I did an unboxing for was inspired by Divine Right. And Divine Right, I found out just a few days after I did the unboxing video that it's going to be republished by Worthington Games. They have a new division of, a new subdivision, I guess, of games. But they're going to be using the 1978, I believe that's when this came out, artwork. So it's going to have that really cool retro feel, but it's going to have upgraded components. King Arthur, Top Secret, Starfall, supplements. Lots of nice reviews here. Play aids, miniatures, computer games, play by mail, and letters. Okay, so that is the Space Gamer. Next we have Dragon Magazine that was published from 1976 to 2007. And it was first published by TSR, then Wizards of the Coast, and then Paizo. Most of the magazine's articles provided supplementary materials for Dungeons and Dragons, as well as fiction. And I think the fiction kind of waned or trailed off in the 1990s, early 1990s. In the early 1980s, issues of Dragon also included something really cool, such as a role-playing adventure, or a special game supplement, or a simple board game, such as The Awful Green Things from Outer Space, which was first published in Dragon Magazine. So let's take a look, and I think this one is from the early 90s right here, and you could just see from the late 70s, early 80s, just the big jump in the gaming scene. So you can see just lots of wonderful ads to drool over, contents, Anchors and Arrows, the Dragon's Bestiary, Undersea Priests, other features related. But the things I'm most interested in, the letters, the forum, convention calendars, things like that. And I just love seeing the old ads in all these old magazines just because it's like a time machine. Kind of just go back and just see what we were all drooling over back then. And of course, lots of lovely artwork, tons of advertisement compared to the Space Gamer. And of course, this was not the late 70s here. This is the early 90s. And also, computer games started being featured more and more. Forums, TSR previews. It's a very thick magazine. Another computer game ad. And they also had comics in the back. Very nice. And back issues of Dragon are pretty expensive. All right, so let's continue to move on. All right, next to be published in 1977 is White Dwarf. And during the first 10 years of its publication, White Dwarf covered a variety of fantasy and science fiction role-playing games and board games, especially games that Games Workshop were the UK distributors for, such as Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and other RPGs such as that. In the late 1980s, the magazine became dedicated exclusively to miniature war games produced by Games Workshop. And of course, this is just now basically a big advertisement platform for their products with tons of gorgeous photography. And I don't have any vintage copies of this. I used to have some from the 90s, and I think I lost those, boy, a long time ago. I have no idea what happened to them, unfortunately. And that's White Dwarf. And then in 1978, we have the Sorcerer's Apprentice. So the Sorcerer's Apprentice was originally published by Flying Buffalo, and it was primarily focused on their RPG Tunnels and Trolls. In addition to the usual gaming articles that you see in these type of magazines, such as variants, Dungeon Master or Game Master tips, adventures, things like that, it also contained a lot of gaming fiction. And so this was a fairly short-lived magazine, 17 issues only, really 16 issues because 2 issues were combined. I think it might have been 10 or 11, something like that, but there wasn't a whole lot of issues produced. And again, this was from 1978 to 1983. So I've got a few issues of Sorcerer's Apprentice. This is fall of 1981, issue 12. And you could see the table of contents here. You've got fiction, articles, monsters here at home, vampire quest, gaming, then the features, troll talk, editorials, queries and quandaries, arcane graffiti, letters to the editor, and broken spines, which are book reviews. And I really enjoyed this magazine because if you watched my Tunnels and Trolls is back. Tunnels and Trolls is the second oldest role-playing game, and it was really solitaire friendly. It was really geared towards a solitaire play, and a lot of these issues contain solitaire games in it. So you can see it also contains nice artwork. And, oh, look at that. Oh yeah, look at this. So I just noticed, so this one has Solitaire Wargame, and it's right here, Thief for Hire. So you read the introduction. If you accept his offer, go to 40C. If you refuse, go to 24B. And so a lot of these just had the game interspersed throughout the entire magazine. So as you can see, it's all paragraph driven. You make a decision, just like their solitaire game modules. Vampire Quest. So it looks like, Board Game Geek, they got a lot of questions and answers, for rules, and you can pretty much get answers in real time, either from the designers themselves or from fellow players. Here, you had to write it into a magazine, or like I did for a war game back in the early 90s, I sent a fax in, because that was new technology, right, the early 90s, and I got a fax back from the game company answering my line of sight question. So convention news, industry news. So of course, GDW released 3 new books to go into the giant box. Letters, Broken Spines, Viking Weapons and Tactics, a Tunnels and Trolls Player's Guide, and overall this was a really nice magazine. City Building, City Mastering, interesting metagaming ad. Haven't seen anything that looked like that. And then we move on to issue 17. You know what? Let's not move on to issue 17 yet. This is the very last issue. I've got issue 16, then 17. So really nice artwork, huh? So more fiction, Carrion Troll, articles, Amazons of Antiquity, We Are Blade. Blade became a subdivision of Flying Buffalo, if I recall. Got another solitaire Tunnels and Trolls scenario. So Gaming Hot Pursuit, Tunnels of Trolls Mini Solo Adventure, Oathbreaker, Dramatic License, and Rogues Gallery, Troll Talk, and all the different, departments. Amazons of Antiquity. And it's kind of cool. It's got illustrations for that mini solitaire adventure. Also kind of fun to see what miniatures looked like back in the day, huh? All right. Conventions, industry news, classifieds. This got me. Tunnels and Trolls players, are you tired of playing Tunnels and Trolls through solitaire adventures? Are you having trouble finding players in your area? I am a privately moderated play-by-mail Tunnels and Trolls campaign. If you'd like more information, please send a legal-sized self-addressed stamped envelope to such and such. Wow, so yeah. Now everyone's connecting through Zoom, huh? And there are some dedicated computer RPG platforms, and I'm blanking out on one of them because I played a couple times during COVID, but that's just not my thing. It's kind of some cool art there. All right, so we'll just kind of flip through this. And an ad for the Space Gamer in Sorcerer's Apprentice. Weapons Shop. Letters, Rogues Gallery. Okay, so these are just pre-made characters. What was that? Mercenary Spies and Private Eyes. And then the last issue, Sorcerer's Apprentice, issue 17. It was an oversized issue. And you can see for more fiction, gaming, creating a legal system in a fantasy world, murderous fantasies, priestess characters. A note from Grimtooth. Grimtooth was the mascot troll. Yeah, this guy right here for Flying Buffalo. Creating a legal system in role-playing games. Murderous fantasies. So I guess you could do an RPG whodunit. And let's just quickly flip through here. Got the regular stuff. Industry news, cons. Hard Times in Hoxley. Okay, so you've got a Dungeon Masters or Game Masters adventure right here. That's nice. Got some cool artwork there. A poem. Delving for dollars. The cost of living in Tunnels and Trolls. Sorry I'm flipping backwards here. It's just easier. But again, some really nice artwork. All right, and finally, Ares was a short-lived magazine that was published by Simulations Publications, Inc., or SPI, and then TSR between 1980 and 1984. In addition to the articles, each issue contained a board war game. Ares was a companion to SPI's military war game magazine called Strategy and Tactics, which included historical war games in each issue. SPI was taken over by TSR in 1982, and they basically killed this magazine. So that's why it's so short-lived. So most of the games were science fiction, but here you got a Ragnarok, Twilight of the Gods, and these fantasy Vikings look like they're doing the YMCA, don't they? I don't know about that artwork. But this was issue number 8 and $4. And let's go ahead and take out the stuff that comes with it, which is namely the magazine game. And I will, at some point in the future, cover this game here. But you can see it has, there's Asgard right there. You got the plane of Vigrid. You've got lots of charts and tables because that's what we did back then when we played war games. Self-addressed stamped envelope. Special offers. Sword in the Stars. Dragon Quest Deluxe. And a list of their games that you could obviously mail a check and receive in the mail. And of course, no game is complete without the counters. And they are double-sided. That wasn't always a thing back in the day. And last chance for a lifetime of magazines. Okie dokie. So anyway, back to the actual magazine. So it does have a historical background on Ragnarok, the mythic story of Twilight of the Gods. Thor, Loki, Freyr. Spy means great science fiction and fantasy. Now, it wasn't until about the mid 70s that fantasy gaming really started taking off. And we obviously got to thank Dungeons and Dragons for that. And then the other game was the micro games, starting with Ogre in 1977. And that is when science fiction and fantasy gaming really started taking off. And the war game companies that did historical board war games started producing fantasy and science fiction games, such as War of the Ring. And I mentioned earlier that I had the deluxe version of this game that I'm really kicking myself for selling. Dragon Quest, Sorcerer, Freedom in the Galaxy. This was a Star Wars ripoff. I still know people who play this game because it's a really, really good game. And I tried to get this game, but someone beat me to it. Sword and Sorcery. So it really started taking off. Then we've got... let's see here. Game variants, Pandora's Link for Pandora game. I think Pandora, this was the magazine game in a previous issue. And that is kind of being redone in an expanded version by GMT Games right now. It's on, I want to say pre-order, it's called their P500 system. But it's a game that will be coming out probably in the next year or two. Facts for Fantasy. Science for Science Fiction. Or ads. Dragon Notes, a regular feature for Dragon Quest players. Designer's Notes. And then you've got Ragnarok. And the paper feels different. It's the rules are gloss. This feels a little bit different. Well, no, actually it's the same. All right, so you got Ragnarok, Twilight of the Gods. So you got the rule book. And they always put in the center so you could remove the staples and take it out if you wish. And this is always a nice thing, them printing the counter sheet. So just in case if something's missing, you can make sure that the game's complete, especially if you resell it or you buy a new copy. All right, a science fiction game sampler. Warp War, Metagaming, Starfire, Task Force Games, Time Lag, Games Shop. Starfire 2, Starfleet Battles. And a game called Quirks, never heard of that game. And then some features for film and television. The media coming to a theater near you, maybe. Books. And games rating chart. Strategy and Tactics had games rating chart for the war games. And it looks like they have it here for science fiction and fantasy. And the previous owner of this circled apparently what they owned. So Traveler is number 1 by GDW. Obviously that's the role-playing game. Imperium, the creature that ate the Shibogan. GEV, Freedom in the Galaxy, Ogre, number 6. And it goes on down. So this is a good way, and these are science fiction games, and then here's fantasy. A good way to take a look and see what games are out there. If you're looking now in the modern age to see what games were available back then. The number one fantasy was RuneQuest, then Dragon Quest, then Melee, then War of the Ring, Robin Hood, Adventures in Fantasy by E.G. I have no idea who that is, but there are abbreviations right here. Death Test I used to own. Divine Right, which is, like I said, is now coming out in a new edition. It was a TSR game, so I'm really looking forward to that. And so I was always enjoyed, looking at these charts when I was a kid. Fantasy modeling and feedback. So again, these are the early magazines that helped form a gaming community, especially for the fantasy and science fiction gamers. And it started with the Space Gamer in 1975, with the Dragon in 1976, White Dwarf 1977, the Sorcerers Apprentice 1978, and Ares Magazine 1980. Well, I hope you enjoyed this quick time capsule here, and I'll see you next time on the Fantasy Skirmisher. Thank you. Oh, and please like. Thanks.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.